So allow yourself to settle down and be still, if you haven't already. At these meetings here, we can feel a lot of peace if we allow ourselves to. Now, we can feel a lot of peace if we allow ourselves to at any point in time. But it seems to be heightened in these meetings because we all hopefully have that shared attention of discovering that which is true, that which is liberating. And that's what we're really trying to do today. Discover that which is true, that which is truly liberating, that which ends suffering. That which, when discovered, nothing else or everything else fades in comparison. It doesn't really matter so much. Or it doesn't matter. Well, it does and doesn't matter. So I'm talking about what is often called the self. You can write it with a capital S, the true self. Now, there's so many different ways of talking about this. There's value in the concept of the self. There's value in the concept of the self. It orientates the seeking mind. And if understood properly, it can allow the seeking mind to engage with a set of teachings, with a set of concepts and a set of practices, and allow ignorance to be rooted out of the system. And when ignorance is rooted out of the system, then there's no suffering. And there is only what we can call bliss. No suffering, just what we can call bliss. Isn't that what we're looking for? We can call it freedom. In Sanskrit, the word for freedom is moksha. Moksha, liberation, freedom. Freedom means we're already free. It means what we are is already free. The problem is ignorance. What's ignorance? Ignorance is the belief that I'm limited. I'm limited, which means I'm vulnerable. I'm subject to birth, illness, and death. And that's scary. And now I've got to worry. Liberation means I'm not subject to birth, illness, and death. Not in essence. I might appear to be. The body certainly appears to be, doesn't it? The body appears to be born, subject to illness, and then subject to death. But listen, all these are fancy words. All these are just fancy words. And they're meaningless unless they point to something substantial, meaningful, realizable. And so that's the point of these teachings. That's the point of these satsangs. And I was talking to someone about this yesterday. And I was saying, these teachings aren't Tom's teachings. You know? These teachings are Ramana's teachings, Ramana Maharshi. And these teachings are not Ramana's teachings. These teachings are the timeless, eternal teachings. They go beyond time, space, geography, culture. They're timeless teachings. And when you look through the teaching traditions, the great traditions, this essential teaching has not changed. It's remained unchanged. I like the way it's expressed in Vedanta, the Vedanta teachings. The Vedanta teachings are the oldest kind of liberation teachings we have, as far as I'm aware, and they have an unbroken lineage. They've been going on for 3,000 to 5,000 years at least, and the teachings haven't changed. So it's not like Tom has come along and said, oh, I've got this brand new teaching for you. No. It's not like Ramana's come along and said, I've got this brand new teaching for you, and this is my special cool teaching and my flavor of it. No. These teachings are the same teachings. And they haven't changed because, one, they point to eternal truths. And secondly, because they work. Because they point to the eternal timeless truths, they don't need to change. And because they work, meaning they deliver liberation, they deliver the result, you don't need to change it. And these teachings are reinvented from age to age. They are sort of rejuvenated from age to age. And one of the great recent rejuvenators of this tradition is Sri Ramana Maharshi. So this is why it's for seekers, it can be very difficult sometimes because there's so many teachings out there and they seem very similar to each other and they can be quite different to each other. From my point of view, well, I remember when I was seeking, it seemed like everyone was saying the same thing in a different way, for the most part. Now, my point of view is most people are not teaching the same thing. So as a seeker, what do you do? Well, I encourage you to take up Ramana as your guru, as your teacher, as a reference point for what is the true teaching. So he's written very few works, very little he's written. I did a blog post yesterday on tomdas.com of what some say is his most important work. And it's about 3 or 4 pages long. It's 3 or 4 pages long. I encourage you to read it, to study it. It's called the 40 Verses on Reality. Ulla Dunarpadu in Tamil. Ulla Dunarpadu means the 40 verses on what is. Commonly translated as 40 verses on reality. It's 40 verses for you to read, for you to study. And all these teachings are in line with the traditional Vedanta teaching. See, tradition's not important at all. But in itself, just because it's old, doesn't mean it's important. But if it works, then that's fantastic. If we've found a methodology of teaching that works, then we just have to share that. Immerse ourselves in it. It also helps us have faith in the teaching because it's not just a product of one person. Like science, like the body of scientific knowledge is not the product of one person. It's not one rogue scientist who's saying, hey, this is what it is, this is the answer. It's the testimony of, apparently, there's that word, apparently hundreds, thousands of sages over time. So maybe we'll get into different aspects of these teachings. In every meeting we have is slightly different. We go over it's different aspects of the teaching, as you know. And over time, if you keep on coming to these meetings, which I encourage you to do, you will hear different aspects of the teaching. They will unfold for you. If you ask a question, that will help the teaching unfold. If you don't ask a question, but you just hold, because you don't want to ask a question, but you hold the intention in your mind, it will still cause the teaching to unfold. Yeah. So you don't even have to ask the question. The teaching will just unfold for you naturally. It's not because Tom is psychic and Tom's amazing that he can read your mind and answer questions. No. It's because that's the way it works. It's much greater than Tom, meaning this body mind. It's got nothing to do with Tom, really. It's just the way the greater forces work is that you have that intention in your mind, that question in your mind, the teaching will come forth. This is why so many people have the experience of being at meetings and then having a question, and then the question is answered without them having to ask it sometimes. Other times you will have to ask the question. Both are good. You follow your heart, you'll know what to do when. Sometimes you'll be moved to speak, and sometimes you'll be moved to keep your mouth shut. Same for me. So your nature is actually, sometimes I talk about happiness coming and going, but your nature is actually happiness. Bliss. That's your nature. Your true nature is happiness. It's so simple. We say that happiness comes and goes. It's a feeling state because there's no need to be attached to happiness. If you're attached to happiness, that's a form of bondage. The ego wants to be happy, so it attaches itself to happiness and it creates its own prison. But when the ego is not there, then there's just your true self, which is unalloyed happiness, unalloyed bliss. Unalloyed means there's nothing mixed with it. An alloy is a mixture. In chemistry, they talk about metal alloys and things like that, when they mix all these metals together. When they mix iron and some other materials together and make steel. But this is unalloyed bliss. Unalloyed means there's nothing mixed with it, meaning there's no unhappiness there at all. There's no unhappiness mixed with it. It's unalloyed bliss. That's just your nature. It's what we all secretly want. We want to be happy, whole, without any sorrow whatsoever. When you are happy and whole, even if just for a moment, but without any sorrow whatsoever, that is called abiding as the self in this conceptual teaching. You could say, well, aren't we always abiding as a self? Yeah, you could say that. But, if you're suffering, there's not much help to you, maybe, to say we're always abiding with the self. And then, okay, well, I'm suffering now. Well, okay, well, you're still abiding as a self. So the teaching uses words in specific ways to guide the seeker. When ignorance is gone, then you can say, yeah, it's all just the self. But until then, often, and I'll change the way I express it from time to time, to be honest. I'll contradict myself at another day, I'm sure. But when you're in that state of total happiness, with no worry, no fear, there's no ego. There's no ego there. There's no egoic desire momentarily. It might come back a second later, but momentarily you're just abiding as the self. So whenever you get what you want, or you get rid of what you don't want, which is the same thing, you're abiding as the self. Every night we abide as the self when we go to deep sleep. And we experience, in quotes, we experience unalloyed bliss. Problem is we're asleep, we're unconscious, so it's not much good. But we still have some kind of inkling that when we're in deep sleep, we're at total peace and tranquility, calm. So the key thing is to bring that deep sleep state where you're total peace and calm, no ego, into the waking state now. And that's the purpose of sadhana. Sadhana means spiritual practice. To bring the deep sleep state into the waking state. In Sanskrit, the deep sleep state or sleeping is called shushupti. And the waking state is called jagrat. So they call this the waking sleep state, abiding as the self while awake. Jagrat Sushupti, it's called in Sanskrit. Jagrat Sushupti means waking sleep. Jagrat means waking. Sushupti means sleep. Jagrat Sushupti, also known as Samadhi. Is to be totally at peace in the waking state. And it's your natural state. That's how you naturally feel when there's no worries, concerns. If you want to learn more about that, if you Google Tom Das, Jagrat Sushupti, I think it'll probably come up, or Waking Sleep, it'll probably come up. I've written a couple of blog posts on it. And it's an ancient teaching. It's found in the oldest of the Upanishads, the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, which is widely believed to be the oldest of the Upanishads, the holy texts. It's also, I think it's the largest of the Upanishads as well, the longest. Contains this teaching in it.